First, let's start with this case. When I started working at my current job, I didn't expect it to turn into a complete mess. I work in a small business, and for the most part, I liked my job. It wasn't my dream career, but it paid the bills and I had a decent schedule. My boss, a man in his 40s, ran the place with a mix of arrogance and desperation. He always talked about how he had big plans to expand, but never actually did anything about it. He also had a habit of getting too involved in his employees' personal lives. A few months ago, I received a well-earned bonus. I had been putting in extra hours, covering for coworkers, and making sure everything ran smoothly. It wasn't a massive amount, but it was a good chunk of money. My boss found out about it, and that's when the problem started. He pulled me aside one day and started talking about how he was working on a big opportunity for the business. He told me that I should invest in the company to help it grow. At first, I thought he was joking, but then I realized he was completely serious. He kept pushing the idea, saying that since I had the extra money, it would be a smart move to put it back into the business. He painted it like I would be helping myself in the long run. I politely declined. I had my own financial goals, and I wasn't about to throw my bonus into something that wasn't even guaranteed to succeed. My refusal didn't sit well with him. He immediately got defensive and started talking about loyalty and how employees should support the company that provides for them. I told him that my job was to work for the business, not to fund it. That conversation ended awkwardly, but I didn't think much of it at the time. A week later, I noticed that my schedule had changed. My usual full-time hours had been cut significantly. I went from working close to 40 hours a week to barely 20. When I asked him about it, he gave me some excuse about needing to make adjustments due to business costs. But I knew it wasn't true because other employees who had been working fewer hours than me before suddenly had their schedules increased. It was obvious retaliation. I tried to push through it, thinking maybe things would level out. But then I started hearing from coworkers that they had also been dealing with similar issues. One had been denied overtime pay for months. Another had noticed that their paycheck was always short by a few hours. It didn't take long before a group of us started comparing notes, and it became clear that my boss had been underpaying employees for a long time. That was the last straw for me. I contacted the appropriate labor authorities and reported him. I provided documentation, including my old and new schedules, as well as messages that hinted at his retaliation. Once the investigation started, other employees started coming forward. It turned out he had been skimming wages from multiple people, especially those who didn't pay close attention to their paychecks. The more they dug, the worse it got for him. In the end, he got hit with multiple lawsuits for wage theft. He tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but no one bought it. He had to pay back thousands in stolen wages, and his reputation was completely ruined. As for me, I found another job before the company collapsed. I don't regret reporting him for a second. Let's start judging. Not the bad goo. Your boss had no right to demand your bonus. Then he cut your hours as retaliation, which is illegal. Reporting him was the right move, and I'm glad others joined in. You're not in the wrong. This is straight-up wage theft, and he got what he deserved. The fact that he had been doing this to multiple employees makes it even worse. You did everyone a favor. Everyone is in the wrong. Your boss is obviously terrible, but I wonder if there was a way to handle it before going straight to reporting him. Maybe you could have talked to him again? Still, I get why you did it. You're not in the wrong. He tried to manipulate you into giving him money and then punished you when you refused. That's beyond unprofessional. Reporting him was the best decision. Next up, I have an older brother, Daniel. He's 27, and for as long as I can remember, he's always been the type to take shortcuts in life. While I worked hard in school, got a decent job, and made sure to handle my responsibilities, Daniel bounced from one bad decision to another. He's never been good with money, always borrowing from our parents, taking out loans he couldn't pay back, and getting into debt with friends. But no matter what, our parents always bailed him out. They always had an excuse for him, he was just struggling, or things would get better soon, or he's family, we help family. It didn't matter how many times he screwed up, someone was always there to clean up his mess. I guess he started assuming that would always be the case. A few months ago, I started noticing strange things with my credit. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A small charge here, a weird inquiry there. I hadn't applied for anything new, so I figured maybe it was an error on my credit report. I decided to check it just to be sure. That's when I saw it. Multiple credit cards had been opened in my name, and they all had balances, thousands of dollars. I was shocked. I had always been careful with my finances, and I knew I hadn't done this. I started looking into the details, and that's when I noticed something else. The mailing address for the accounts wasn't mine. It was my parents' house. I didn't even need to think twice. I knew who it was. Daniel had stolen my identity and opened credit cards in my name. I felt sick. I called my parents immediately and told them what was going on. I expected them to be just as angry as I was, but instead, they brushed it off. My mom tried to downplay it, saying it wasn't a big deal and that Daniel had just hit a rough patch. My dad told me to be reasonable and work something out with my brother instead of making a big scene. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My brother had committed fraud, had stolen from me, and they were acting like it was no different from borrowing $20. I didn't care what they thought. I wasn't letting this go. I filed a police report. I contacted the credit card companies, explained that these were fraudulent accounts, and did everything I could to make sure this wouldn't ruin my credit. The police took it seriously. They started an investigation, and within a few weeks, Daniel was arrested. That's when all hell broke loose. My parents lost it. My mom was crying, saying I had destroyed our family. My dad called me heartless, saying I had ruined Daniel's life over a little money. They both acted like I had betrayed them instead of the other way around. Daniel, of course, played the victim. He swore he was going to pay everything back, that he had just needed some help, that I had overreacted. But I knew better. He had no intention of fixing this. He had lied, stolen, and put me in a terrible financial situation without a second thought. If I hadn't caught it early, my credit could have been ruined for years. Now he's facing real consequences for once in his life, and my parents blame me. They say I should have handled it privately, that I should have given him a chance to fix it. They refuse to see that he was never going to fix anything. Some of my extended family is on my side, saying that Daniel got what he deserved. Others think I went too far by involving the police. I don't feel guilty for protecting myself, but now I'm wondering, did I go too far? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. Your brother committed fraud. He stole from you. This isn't a small mistake. It's a crime. He's only facing the consequences of his own actions. Everyone sucks. Your brother is obviously in the wrong, but reporting him to the police instead of handling it within the family was extreme. Now he has a record, and that will affect him for the rest of his life. You're in the wrong. He's your brother. Family should take care of each other. You could have worked something out instead of ruining his future. Next up, I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where most people keep to themselves. I have a driveway big enough for my car and occasionally use the extra space when I have friends or family over. My neighbor, Eric, lives right next door. He moved in about a year ago, and from the start, he was the kind of person who acted like the street belonged to him. At first, it was small things. He'd let his visitors park partially in front of my driveway, forcing me to squeeze past. Then he started asking if they could use my driveway just for a few minutes. I was fine with it once or twice, but soon it became constant. Every time he had people over, he expected me to let them park in my driveway. If I said no, he'd act annoyed, like I was being selfish. I tried to be reasonable, but I didn't buy a house just so someone else could use my property whenever they felt like it. Last weekend, he had some kind of gathering at his place. I saw cars lined up all along the street, and as expected, he came over asking if his guests could use my driveway. I told him no. He got irritated, saying it wasn't a big deal, but I stood my ground. A few minutes later, when I went to leave, I saw his car parked right across my driveway, blocking me in completely. I was furious. I went over and knocked on his door, but he ignored me. I could hear music and people talking inside, but he wasn't coming out. I called his phone, no answer. I even texted him, but he left me on read. I wasn't about to let him get away with this. I called a towing company and had his car removed. About an hour later, he finally showed up at my door, furious. He demanded to know where his car was. I told him I had it towed since he decided to block my driveway. He lost it, shouting about how I had no right, how he was going to make me pay for the towing fee, and how I had ruined his night. I told him he shouldn't have blocked me in and that this was entirely his fault. That only made him angrier. He stormed off, but I figured that was the end of it. The next day, I found out the situation was worse than I thought. Apparently, he had to work early that morning, but since his car was impounded, he couldn't get there in time. His job had a strict policy about tardiness, and since this wasn't the first time he was late, they fired him. Now he's telling everyone in the neighborhood that I'm the reason he lost his job. He even went to some of our neighbors trying to turn them against me, saying I was being petty over a parking spot. A few people think I took it too far and should have just let it go, but others agree that he brought it on himself. Now I'm wondering if I was too harsh. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. He blocked your driveway on purpose and ignored your attempts to get him to move. He faced the consequences of his own actions. Everyone sucks. He was completely in the wrong for blocking your driveway, but getting his car towed knowing he had work the next morning was harsh. You're in the wrong. You could have knocked again or waited. Instead, you escalated things over a minor inconvenience, and now he's out of a job. No one is in the wrong. He was wrong to block you in, but you also had the right to tow. It's just an unfortunate situation all around. Next up. Today, I, a 24-year-old woman standing at 5 feet 2 inches, was on my way home from work. I walked down the stairs leading to the underpass to reach my train platform. Since childhood, I had been taught to stick to the right side while walking. I was so far on the right side that the wall was practically next to me. As I moved down the stairs, I noticed an older man, likely in his 60s, about 20 meters away. He was on my left side, his right. We made eye contact, and he suddenly began shifting toward my side of the underpass, directly into my path. I found it odd, but I have recently made it a habit not to move out of the way when I am already walking as far to the right as possible. So I kept going, with the wall barely brushing my shoulder. As he continued approaching, he positioned himself directly in front of me. I refused to move, and we both came to a stop. The underpass is about 10 meters wide, so he had more than enough space to go around. He stared at me for a few seconds before placing his hand on my right shoulder, attempting to push me aside while saying, "Attention, madam." I looked at him and smiled before mirroring his actions. I placed my hand on his shoulder, gently pushing him back while saying, "Attention, sir." His smug expression quickly faded into one of bewilderment as he finally stepped aside. However, as he moved away, he did not leave without calling me an unpleasant name. I want to add that he walked normally and that we were no longer near the stairs, where he might have needed to use the railing. We were also nearly alone in the underpass. Am I in the wrong here? Edit. I forgot to mention that I live in Switzerland. Additionally, he originally started on my left side, his right, meaning he deliberately crossed several meters to end up in my path. I want to clarify that I always move aside for individuals with mobility issues or those who cannot navigate freely. My decision not to move only applies to people who are just as capable of adjusting their path as I am. Let's start judging. It's possible, as someone else has said, that he was from a different country where the custom is to stick to the left. We do in the UK. But even if that were the case, he would still be TA for not reassessing what he was doing when he saw that you were walking on the right, not just dodging around you into the clear space regardless of what any assumed rules were, and definitely for getting in your space and actually touching you. That creeps me out just reading about it. Whatever his confusion was, it excuses none of that, nor does it overrule your ability to walk on the customary side for your environment or to reassert your personal space, however sarcastically. You're not in the wrong. You're not in the wrong. Normal people usually move out of the way to avoid running into others not purposefully moved to be in their way. I don't know what he hoped to accomplish doing that, but I'm glad you stood your ground with this one. Time for the old dog to learn a new trick. Respect. That was a power play. I experienced similar things when I was a very young woman from old men. They're bitter because they're old and can no longer have any sort of power over other men. And the women in their lives, if there are any, are old and aren't going to take their crap. So they pull little passive-aggressive moves like this on young women, either hoping they're too polite or too intimidated to tell them to fuck off. They wouldn't have tried this if you were a 24-year-old man. You handled it well. You're not in the wrong.